two cities, 2,000 years, one empire that refused to die. This is the story of every man who sat on the throne of Rome, from the first to the very last. Rome didn't become an empire because one man was ambitious. It happened because the Republic had been tearing itself apart in civil wars for 100 years, and by the time Augustus won, everyone was too exhausted to object. He kept the Senate, kept the elections, kept all the ceremonies, and quietly put all real power in his own hands. He called himself the first citizen. Nobody argued. The family he left behind turned out to be a very different story. Tiberius ruled from an island through informers and fear. Caligula turned the throne into a personal theater of cruelty. Claudius, the man everyone assumed was harmless, proved to be the shrewdest administrator of all four. And Nero showed that the empire could survive even a man who cared about nothing except himself. The year 69 AD had 4 different emperors. Each one was put in place by a different army. Each one was destroyed by a different army. That was the lesson Rome couldn't unlearn. The emperor wasn't chosen by law or by blood anymore. He was chosen by whoever held the most swords. Vespasian accepted that reality and built a stable dynasty anyway. His son Titus handled 3 catastrophes in 2 years without losing control. His second son Domitian had senators killed for reasons nobody could follow. When Domitian was murdered, an old senator named Nerva did something Rome had never tried. He adopted the best military commander he could find and named him the next emperor. That man was Trajan. Under Trajan, Rome reached the furthest it would ever go, from Scotland to Iraq, from the Sahara to the Black Sea. More people lived under Roman rule than under any single government until the modern era. Hadrian's contribution was knowing when to stop. He pulled back from the hardest to hold territories and spent years personally walking every frontier, not to conquer more, but to understand what Rome could actually defend. Marcus Aurelius inherited a world at peace and spent almost his entire reign fighting Germanic tribes pressing down from the north, while plague killed hundreds of thousands back home. He read philosophy and wrote in his journal between battles. Then Commodus. He had everything his father built, and he chose the arena instead. His own advisors had him strangled in his bath on New Year's Eve, 192 AD. Not one person in Rome objected. In 50 years, between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had more than 20 emperors. Most lasted less than 2 years. Most died violently. The pattern never changed. A general won a battle on the frontier. His soldiers proclaimed him emperor on the spot. He marched on Rome, killed whoever was already there, and ruled until a different general's army did the same to him. The throne had become the most dangerous job in the world, and men kept fighting to get it. At the same time, everything else fell apart at once. The plague of Cyprian killed thousands every single day in Rome alone. Germanic tribes broke through the Rhine and Danube frontiers. The Persian Empire captured a Roman emperor alive, the first time that had ever happened, and kept him as a personal trophy for years. 2 separate empires broke away from Roman control: Gaul Britain and Spain in the west, Syria and Egypt in the east, each with its own emperor, its own army, and no intention of returning. One emperor was purchased at public auction. One lasted 21 days. One was a teenage Syrian boy who replaced Jupiter with his home god and held ceremonies on Rome's holiest hill that shocked even the most jaded senators. Aurelian finally stopped the bleeding. In 5 years, he reconquered all 3 breakaway empires, rebuilt the walls of Rome, and steadied the currency. The Romans called him restorer of the world. Then his own officers killed him. Because some things take longer than 5 years to fix, Diocletian's solution was radical. Split the empire into 4 parts with 3 co-rulers, each responsible for their own frontier. It stabilized the borders and stopped any one general from seizing everything at once. Then he did something no emperor had ever done. He resigned voluntarily and went home to grow vegetables in Croatia. Constantine reunited the empire by force and then changed it permanently. He converted to Christianity and made it the official religion of Rome. The old temples, the old festivals, the old gods, gone within 2 generations. Every Roman emperor after Constantine was Christian. The empire that had once thrown Christians to the lions was now run by them. In 376 AD, hundreds of thousands of Goths arrived at the Danube, refugees driven west by the Huns from the east. Emperor Valens let them cross into Roman territory. Roman officials then cheated them on food and supplies for months. The Goths revolted, and at Adrianople in 378 AD, the Roman army was destroyed. Valens died somewhere in the chaos. His body was never found. That battle couldn't be undone. The Goths stayed inside Roman borders because Rome couldn't push them out. More foreign peoples followed. Western armies grew increasingly dependent on Gothic soldiers and Gothic commanders. The empire was being held up by the very people it could no longer defeat. The Western Empire didn't collapse in a single moment. It rotted across 70 years. No money to pay soldiers. No soldiers to defend the borders. No borders to protect the trade routes that funded everything. When Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain who commanded what was left of the Western Roman army, which by that point was mostly Germanic soldiers anyway, walked into the palace at Ravenna in 476 and sent the last Western emperor to live on a pension by the sea, nobody fought back. There was nothing left to fight with. He didn't conquer Rome. He just stopped pretending there was still a Western emperor worth having. When the West fell in 476, the Eastern Empire in Constantinople simply continued. There was no handover, no ceremony, no moment where someone decided the East was now in charge. The East had always been the wealthier, more populated, better defended half. It just kept going and called itself Roman for another 1,000 years, speaking Greek, following Roman law, building on Roman foundations, and calling itself Roman. We call it Byzantine. They would have found that word confusing. Justinian tried to put the whole empire back together. His general Belisarius reconquered North Africa, Italy, and southern Spain. For a brief moment, the Mediterranean was almost Roman again. Then the Justinianic plague struck. 25 million people died across the empire. The armies holding those reconquered territories had no replacements. Within a generation, most of what Belisarius had won was gone again. Then the Arabs arrived. Within 20 years of the Prophet Muhammad's death, Arab armies had taken Syria, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. Heraclius had spent his entire reign recovering those same territories from Persia. He watched them disappear again in a decade. The world was changing faster than any emperor could follow. Byzantine history is full of emperors murdered in their baths, strangled at dinner, or thrown from columns by angry mobs, and yet the state kept functioning. The palace violence was brutal, but contained. It happened inside the palace walls, while Constantinople carried on outside them. When Irene took the throne alone, Charlemagne in the West declared himself the true Roman emperor, on the grounds that a woman holding power meant the Eastern throne was effectively empty. The two halves of the old Roman world had become completely separate civilizations. They shared a history, but no longer shared a future. The century between Irene and Basil II was full of emperors who lasted just long enough to be murdered by the next one. A skull turned into a drinking cup, an assassination during Christmas Mass, a drunkard stabbed in bed by the man he trusted most, a peasant who founded a dynasty on the graves of his predecessors. The Palace of Constantinople was the most dangerous address in the world, and still the most coveted. Nikephoros II Phocas was the greatest soldier of his generation. He reconquered Cilicia, retook Antioch after 300 years of Arab rule, and pushed Byzantine power further east than it had been in decades. He slept on the floor in full armor because he didn't trust his own palace. He was right not to. His wife and his nephew murdered him in his bed on a December night in 969. Basil II was the last emperor to make Byzantium genuinely feared by its neighbors. 40 years of almost continuous warfare. Bulgaria crushed permanently, the Balkans under Byzantine control. When he blinded 15,000 Bulgarian prisoners after his greatest battle, leaving one eye per 100 men so the others could be led home, every neighboring kingdom watching understood exactly what it meant. After Basil II, no emperor came close to what he had built. The only question left was how much longer it could last. After Basil II, Byzantium entered a slow decline that lasted 4 centuries. The Macedonian dynasty ended in palace murders and bad marriages. The Komnenian family who replaced them were brilliant military rulers. They stabilized the empire for a century, but couldn't reverse the deep losses. The battle that mattered most was Manzikert in 1071. Emperor Romanos IV was captured by the Seljuk Turks, and Byzantine forces lost control of central Anatolia, the heartland of the empire's military manpower. Without that recruitment base, Byzantium could never again field armies large enough to defend all its borders. Anatolia slowly became Turkish over the following century. Andronikos I ruled through fear and executions. After 2 years, a Constantinople mob dragged him into the street and tore him apart alive. Then came the Crusades. Emperor Alexios I wrote to the Pope asking for a few thousand mercenaries to help push the Turks back from the frontier. What arrived instead was hundreds of thousands of armed Western Europeans who barely took orders from anyone, let alone from Constantinople. The First Crusade accidentally worked, but the Crusaders planted their own kingdoms on Byzantine territory, and the two sides never fully trusted each other again. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 was the disaster that couldn't be undone. The Crusaders were supposed to attack Egypt. Through a chain of broken promises and political debts, they turned toward Constantinople instead. They sacked the largest Christian city in the world and occupied it for 57 years. When the Byzantines finally took Constantinople back in 1261, they found a gutted shell. The population was a fraction of what it had been. The wealth was gone. The city that had once been the richest in Europe had been stripped to the walls. From 1261 onward, the Ottoman Turks grew stronger every decade, while Byzantium shrank. The last Paleologos emperors spent their reigns traveling Western courts with their hands out, asking for armies that never came. The West listened politely and sent nothing. The empire that had once stretched across 3 continents was, by the 1440s, reduced to the city of Constantinople and a handful of territories outside it. On the morning of May 29, 1453, it was over. Constantine XI died fighting in the breach, the gap the Ottoman cannons had blasted through the walls. His body was never found, just like Valens 1,000 years before him. 1,500 years after Augustus, the last Roman emperor was gone.